destiny, fate, a predetermined timeline, whatever you want to call it. You can't prove whether such things exist or not. It's a tricky thing. Prophecies are normally used in stories to predict destiny in universe, and you can tell if they are true eventually through time, unlike a predetermined timeline, because prophecies always have endings. But the funny thing about prophecies is that they are stretched, flexible, open to interpretation. Look no further than Percy Jackson. A prophecy is foretold, but like fortune telling, it's told in a way that can be twisted into whatever that happens. But in stories, even if they behave like that, they're still mostly true. They are very simple to write and can be very easy plot twists. Now, let's talk about Artoria. Altria Caster. Yes, I'm filthy. Cultura, if you would. I have made an Oberon video that mentions her, but I think a video on her would be good too. As I'm writing the script, I already know the video is gonna be longer than Red Rabbit's Carrot, so let's just go about Cultura chronologically. First, let's talk about all of her seasons, if you will. I lied. Before any of that, first let's uncover the world of Fairy Britain, the place of Cultria's journey. In Fate Go, there are lost belts, timelines that should not exist. These timelines are branched from proper human history, think of it as their own world, because of an entity called the Alien God. This alien god isn't important to Fairy Britain, so I won't talk about her much. For a more thorough explanation, just pause the video and read the words on screen. But in short, each of these lost belts are what ifs. What if the Olympic gods didn't die? Or what if all the Norse gods other than Skadi died, leaving her alone to rule Scandinavia? A divergence from the proper timeline. Because they are needed to exist, humanity was bleached, basically ending human history in an instant. Those are lost belts, and Fairy Britain is one of them. It is a land mostly ruled by different types of fairies. It has existed for a very long time, and is divided into two segments of history, just like proper human history. The Fae era, which persisted for 12,000 years, and the era of the High Queen, which started almost 2,000 years ago. It's basically just AD and BC. BC equals Fae era and AD equals era of the High Queen. Inhabiting the lands are humans, which are actually mostly slaves, and fairies, which include a few races. The Wind Clan, basically elves, the Earth Clan, think of them as dwarves, the Fang Clan, they go to furry conventions, the Wing Clan, they all died, the Mirror Clan eventually gets final solutioned, and the King Clan, which is technically just Nagnaria. There was also the Rain Clan. As you may have noticed, 4 out of the 7 clans are either already dead or only have a single-digit populations. Some may call them massacres, I call it natural selection. And then you have the Fairies of Paradise. They don't belong to any of the clans, but are dispatched from the planet itself, from Avalon, to make things right, whatever that means. And Cultura is one of them, a Fairy of Paradise, sent as a seed of a star from Avalon into the cursed lands of Fairy Britain. One day before their genocide, the leader of the Mirror Clan, called Einzel, probably during 2003, foretold a prophecy, and it starts with, "I shall now speak of a future, of the end of the Isle of Mystics, which came to be known as Fairyland. Let the innocent return. Here stands the Queen's unknowable castle. It falls, like rain, like ash. It vanishes, like snow, like lies. Our desires languish, deferred. Even now we dance in the palm of the Queen's hand. We require now only a little more patience. After 2000 years, the dawn shall bring the child who will be our salvation. She will be the child who saves the world, who binds both peoples together. Even if her light begins as but an ember, even should no one see it, she will become as a flame to draw moths." This is merely half of the prophecy, but it's all we need for now. The first line is just an introduction and tells us that this prophecy is about Fairy Britain. Now, what is the innocent? I'm not sure. It might be the priestess we learn of later, but I doubt it. It could be the world itself, or most likely, proper human history and Chaldea. If I had to say, I would say that it's proper human history. The next line is about the Queen of Fairy Britain, Morgan, a counterpart of her proper human history version from Camelot. In this Lost Belt, she became the Queen of Fairy Britain and has been ruling over the lands for about 2000 years now. Unknowable basically means vast or huge. Now might be the good time to say that the English translation is far more cryptic. It falls. In Japanese, it's tsumaru, which basically means to accumulate or pile up. Quite different. So these next two lines might just be about the vastness and history, in a way setting the tone. The next line talks about how the Queen is basically a dictator and has everyone in the palm of her hands. The next few lines talk about a savior that will appear soon. A savior in the form of a child. The child of prophecy, if you will. She will save the world and bring everyone together. So, no more racism. The one who will kill racism. Anyway, the last line is about how she will have to grow, because we can't just have a toddler going around saving the world in her diapers. Which, of course, while not in the prophecy itself, it's mentioned that the journey of this child of prophecy begins at around the age 16. So until then, the fairies will have to wait. If you didn't realize already somehow, Artoria is the child of prophecy. She, along with the staff of selection, which is basically what confirms her as the child of prophecy, got dispatched by Avalon, or the planet itself, to the lake region, which is a region in Fairy Britain, with a lake. I know, genius. In there, she was found by the Mirror Clan, before they all died, and Ainzel decided to send her off on a boat filled with treasures. And from there, she arrived to Tintagel, basically her hometown. And this is finally when we can get to her winter memories. Finally, we can talk about her. Hurry and greet your 16th birthday. We have complete faith in you, which is why you must give everything you have for us. These were some of the first words spoken to Artoria. She was found by the residents of Tintagel, and her arrival was controversial. Some thought of it as good luck, with how she came with immense treasure, while others saw her as a bad omen. The queen also knew about the prophecies, so there was a chance that she could come and take the child in whatever way she can. But they all agreed on one thing: she could be useful. So the fairies decided to raise her until she turned 16. But there was a problem. Being the Fairy of Paradise, that's what the fairies from Avalon are called, Caltria was different from the other fairies, more akin to proper human history fairies. There are several differences, like the lack of Fae eyes that all Fae Britain fairies share. Because of that fact, Caltria, in their eyes, was rather privileged. As the hero of prophecy, they saw her as arrogant, even if at this point she couldn't talk. Because of that, they decided to deprive her of a house and raise her like livestock, like a horse. This way, they could just tell the other villages that they are raising a horse, not the child of prophecy. So, not great people. Unlike other fairies, Caltria had almost no magical energy. Fairies normally have several times the magical energy of a regular human, so Caltria having almost none was rather rare. Because of that, the fairies started to worry about her. If she stayed like this, she couldn't even protect herself, could she? So 4 years after her arrival, they decided to train her. They got harder on her, more methodical. For her own good, they decided to deprive her of sleep when she's only about 4 years old. The fairies are not human. They think completely differently. To them, this style of upbringing is only natural. They are putting their hope into this child of prophecy, so they better get their beliefs worth. Of course, this didn't work. Slowly, their goal changed. Instead of making her the child of prophecy, they decided to have her act as the child of prophecy. If she couldn't get stronger, they could groom her into being sold. After all, why else would they raise her? She was too weak, so there was no fear of her running away either. And Caltria wasn't exactly old enough to even formulate meaningful thoughts. She was a child, a really young one. As I already said, Caltria has Fae eyes, and with them, she could see the true nature of things. For example, she could tell how the fairies around her felt about her. She could tell when someone lied or pretended. They all feared and loathed her. The fairies that feared her believed in the child of prophecy with all their hearts and worked her like a slave. The fairies that loathed her hated the Fairy of Paradise and abused her without a second thought. And everyone else was simply indifferent. She was a precious resource, but not a person. Something that could bring them happiness, but not cherished. Even so, she held some hope. She knew that she had a purpose and had to bring them salvation. Even that young, she knew her duty. She could deal with the abuse, mistreatment, and the like. But her true feelings were too much to bear. The deceit, the selfishness, the self-interest, the envy. She could feel all of it with her Fae eyes, whether she wanted to or not. Still, she kept up with the training even if it didn't do much. Because of her lack of magical energy, she couldn't use magic or magecraft. So she just used her staff as a whacking stick. But not all hope was lost, which is where we get to Merlin, quote unquote. One day, as she was training with her staff at around 6 years old, she started hearing a voice. Her staff itself started talking to her, or so she thought. The staff assured her that it wasn't a staff, but just some nosy guy that had enough of Tintagel's antics. So, he was using the staff as a medium for communication, probably with magecraft. This nosy weirdo introduces himself as Merlin, the Mage of Flowers, which is actually just Oberon pretending to be Merlin because he's a serial liar. And so, he declared himself Caltria's teacher and started teaching her magecraft. Caltria was amazed and asked him if she could fly, but he shut that down because that is too complicated for a first spell, and totally not because he didn't know how to fly either. Caltria started getting suspicious, so he told her to tell him if there are any difficulties that she's facing. Maybe he could teach her something to help her. She thought for a second, and told him that the night was too cold. She revealed that last year, when she was 5, she lost 2 of her toes to the cold. She just hasn't told anyone yet. Oberon was obviously brought down by that, so he told her that in 2 days, he would find her a spell that would help her with that. Again, Oberon is not Merlin, so he actually isn't too good with magecraft. Because of that, every spell that Caltria learned from him, he had to learn first. So in those 2 days, he was learning a spell that he could teach her. From there, he started teaching her many spells, from healing, lockpicking, terrorism, to camouflage. He taught her whatever she asked for. One day, she asked him why he was helping her so much, to which he told her that he isn't actually a fairy of Britain, which was a joke. So the reason he gave was that he wanted her to be a fantastical hero, someone straight out of a storybook, someone that can exhale hope and spread inspiration, someone that can bring people together with just her existence. A nameless king who stood at the edge of the world rather than its center, a beacon of hope for others, a starlight shining brilliantly with possibilities. He assured her that she could do it. He believed in her. Though all of that only lasted a year. One day, a fairy girl saw her laughing alone in the fields and reported her to the village. So the village took her staff from her and would only give it back when she turned 16. Oberon, or as she knew it, Merlin, was taken away from her. Without the staff, they had no means of communication. The only friend that Caltria made up to that point, she lost in a year. This is the end of her winter memories at the age of 7. Around 5 years later, 12 years after she drifted to Tintagel as a baby, began her autumn memories. Up until now, she was never allowed to leave the village by herself. That is until a fairy decided to send her on an errand. He gave her a pouch filled with iron and told her to take it to a place called Drift Cape, where a lone Earthclan fairy lives. Caltria had no real choice but to agree. So, she went there and saw that the place was a smithy that, quote-unquote, Merlin had told her about. Caltria is fascinated by anything smithing related. To her, it wasn't just a smithy, but an iron theme park filled with gadgets that she didn't know about. As she was there in the smithy, gushing about the fact that she actually stepped foot in it, an old-looking fairy showed up. His name was Ector. He had been living as a blacksmith in Driftcape for hundreds of years. He was pretty much a hermit, only interacting with people if it had to do with his smithy. At first, he was angry and thought that she was a thief, and that didn't change when he saw the pouch and found out that she was just on an errand. He kept shouting at her, telling her to speak louder. It was common knowledge that his hearing wasn't good, and that he hated the fairies despite being one himself. That is until he saw her face, and in an instant, he figured out that she was the child of prophecy, and realized that it had been 12 years since Einzel's prophecy. After that, he told her to go and never show up again, that there was no place for her here in the backwaters. Caltria, still rather scared, said yes and left, though she was still excited about the fact that she managed to visit his smithy. A bit later, she showed up again, wanting to play in the smithy. Ector was weirdly not surprised. At first, he didn't want her to touch his stuff because fairies, for whatever reason, are allergic to processed iron. But she was different, so she could touch as many things as she wanted. Slowly, Ector began warming up to Caltria and told her to tell the elder that if he sent him an assistant, he would give discounts. This way, Caltria could show up to the smithy whenever she wanted as an assistant. He shouted, her to call him Grandpa Smithy and to show up every other day. And just like that, she got a new mentor in Ector. He taught her the things he knew, and she learned as much as she could. She learned that Ector wasn't like the other blacksmiths and wasn't just a known figure around Tintagel, but he was known around the bigger cities as well. Around a year later, for the first time she saw a customer show up in person, and that customer was none other than Tomlin Gawain, a knight of the Queen. Caltria tried to be polite and greet her, but was completely ignored. Barghest, Tomlin Gawain's real name, was here for an armor she had ordered a while back. Caltria knew that, as an important knight of the Queen, she was a well-known figure, probably respected as well, with a good bit of money too. Enough to afford a well-made armor. Caltria was rather annoyed. Maybe she's just a hater, I don't know. After putting on her armor, Barghest suggested Ector to come to the capital and work for the Queen if possible. This made Caltria real mad. Ector was the only fairy, other than quote-unquote Merlin, who actually cared for her. If Ector went away, she would be alone again. So, she voiced her frustrations and glared at Barghest, to which Barghest basically dismissed her and, being only 190 centimeters, the way people talk to her, you would think she's some 3-meter tall giant, but she's only tall like a regular person. Psh. Anyway, as a tall person, she told Caltria that, for her, it's a little pain in the neck to talk to someone so short, and that she should only talk when she has grown up. Either way, she still did leave without pursuing the matter. This is where Caltria's weird dislike for Barghest started. Either way, Caltria stayed with Ector for around 4 years, almost 16 years old. During that time, she was taught basically everything Ector knew. Ector didn't just make weapons and armor, but jewels and other accessories as well. a nearby village was celebrating a festival, so he had orders to make a bunch of trinkets. Caltria had a habit of staring at them, so Ector told her to take one. Caltria was pretty delighted, but decided against it. If the villagers saw her with something like a hair clip, which she liked more than other trinkets, they would take it away like her staff. The fairies didn't want Caltria to really own anything. They had proven that fact by taking away her staff of selection. She was actually reminded of a conversation she once had with Merlin. How he told her that if she is dissatisfied with something, she should just be honest, at least with him. If there's a spell she wanted, she should just say so without thought. She, of course, wanted to be a terrorist. Like always, he told her to wait. Caltria told him, "Wow, you're so kind and helpful, you must get a lot of dates." He told her that he was never one for love, but was once thrusted into it, and was better than anyone else. Just go watch my Oberon video. On the morning that Caltria turned 16, the fairies wanted proof that she was the child of prophecy. So, they gave her a weapon and told her to kill the blacksmith in Driftcape. It was scary to them. They were always anxious with them. So, they wanted them dead. This was the end of Caltria's autumn memories. And now we get to the summer memories. Turns out, Ector used to be one of the Queen's Imperial Guards, but for whatever reason, ended up in Driftcape. As I said, the fairies felt threatened by his existence, so they decided to send Caltria to murder him. Caltria decided to go through with it. After all, she was the child of prophecy, the one they all put their hopes into. She couldn't refuse either. Who knows what would have happened if she did? So, in the dead of the night, she went to Ector's smithy. "I have to kill him. I have to kill him." She repeated to herself so that she wouldn't back out. This was what she had to do to prove herself. Otherwise, they would see her as an imposter and kill her. And so she went, step by step, creak, creak. She was terrified. If this didn't work, her entire life, suffering, harassment, and hope would be for nothing. Creak, creak. And so she swung the knife down as hard as she could and left. She sheathed her now chipped knife, trembling with fear, but she was still optimistic. The fairies were simple. If she just explained everything to the fairies, they would understand. But things didn't work out. She was followed and stalked by one of the fairy friends, and that friend saw everything. How she didn't actually kill Ector, but just stabbed one of his helmets. Now, in the eyes of the tentacle fairies, she wasn't the child of prophecy anymore, only a fake. If she couldn't kill one of Morgan's agents, how could she take her on herself? They didn't know that Ector really was just an old Imperial Guard and not an agent. He was basically retired. And so, she tried to run, but it was futile. They took her and threw her in a jail. To gain the Queen's favor, they called Woodvose and his army. Woodvose being one of Queen Morgan's most important people. In 3 days, they would show up. There were many fairies that had opinions. Some hated her and wanted her gone. Some still believed in her, but decided to go along with the other fairies. The treasures that were in Caltria's boat 16 years ago ran out. If they sold her, they might get her rich again. But she wasn't out of hope yet. While they wouldn't help her, some fairies would look the other way if she escaped. Because of that, Caltria waited. If an opportunity came, she would run immediately. But before she could do any of that, she started hearing commotions. And soon, out came Hector, bloodied but not in terrible shape. He brought a helmet that could hide her face, and also her staff of selection. Merlin's voice was long gone, but it was still a very important item to her, something that she owned for herself. He urged her to run as far as she could. Caltria started running, and as she escaped, she saw Tintagel on fire. The whole town was burning. She thought that it must have been Woodvose and his army, but that was far from the truth. The Tintagel fairies were suffering from overpopulation and couldn't make it past the winter, so they started killing each other. Remember, these aren't humans, but fairies. They think completely differently. Woodvose, finally reaching the village, was absolutely shook. For a long time after this, everyone thought that Woodvose destroyed Tintagel, but even he was confused about what he was seeing. The fairies weren't listening to reason and were actively hostile towards everyone. Because of that, Woodvose thought it would be a good idea to just kill them all so that they wouldn't harm him and his army. He ordered his men to kill everyone other than the Child of Prophecy, because the queen wanted her alive. Altria wanted to help the village, but Hector stopped her. They may have failed her the whole time, but she couldn't help but want to help them. Is this Stockholm Syndrome, or is it just screw me? Maybe both. Either way, Hector grabbed her hand and started running. After a while, he told her to keep running by herself. He himself would go back to Driftcape and keep working there. He told her to never visit him again because of how troublesome she was. Unfortunately, Caltria could see straight through his lies because of her Fae eyes. Whether that was a good thing for her or not. Hector also somehow realized this, so he decided to be honest. The village was done for, and the executioners were here. He was injured and wasn't gonna survive. No matter what anyone says, Caltria is the Child of Prophecy, whether that's a good thing or not. Caltria reminded Hector of someone he knew. A stubborn sore loser who keeps getting back up no matter how many times she falls. And with those words, he died. With that, Caltria got up, tearing, mourning, but looking as cheerful as ever. If Britain needed her to be a savior, then she will be a savior, even if she has to fail 1,000,000 times to do it. But things weren't that easy. No one anywhere took her seriously. She still had almost no magical energy, and a lot of places didn't exactly want a Child of Prophecy either. The humans that work for the fairies aren't really interested, and the fairies themselves are mostly pretending. Fairies latch onto anything that's fun or trendy. No one actually cares about some Child of Prophecy. Fairies are reactionary, as simple as that. Even if people wanted Morgan gone, they weren't that passionate about it. Sure, she does things no one likes, but no one wants to put in any effort to stop her. Caltria wasn't accepted anywhere. Everyone laughed at her, mocked her, and used her. But no one believed in her. At this point, it wasn't even that fun to the fairies anymore. They loved the idea, but only the idea. If the idea came to fruition, it would just be a pain. Consumed by despair and depression, she decided to go to the Nameless Woods, a place surrounded by a fog that eats away your memories and leaves you trapped inside it. She wanted to forget. She wanted to be different. But the curse of the Nameless Woods didn't affect her as a fairy of paradise. So that was a bust as well. Fortunately, in the Nameless Woods, there was a small village of fairies that all had lost their memories, so at least she could pretend that she really did lose her memories and just live there. But things didn't work out that way either. Soon, a fairy that had lost his memories came in. He was so badly hurt physically and emotionally that she felt like she just had to help him. But most of all, she thought that if he's forgotten about the child of prophecy, maybe there's a chance that they could be friends. And that is the end of her summer memories and backstory. Now, we went through winter, autumn, and summer memories, so what about her spring memories? We will get to that. For now, we will study. First of all, let's delve deeper into Fae Britain. Remember how I said that every lost belt has a starting point? For Fairy Britain, it's around 1400 years ago. In the Nasuverse, there was an age called the Age of Gods, and in this age, gods ruled over the earth. Simple. Gods and deities from all sorts of mythologies. But around 1200 BC, an alien ship called Sephar invaded Earth and started causing havoc. She is what started the decline of the Age of Gods. She killed and injured most gods greatly, and almost killed everything on Earth. But when all hope was lost, a human was given the holy sword Excalibur and managed to kill Sephar. It was only possible because of Excalibur, and the ones who made Excalibur were the fairies. But here in Fae Britain, they didn't make the holy sword, and as a consequence, almost all of Earth was destroyed. All that remained was a sea of nothingness. Now, why did the 6 original fairies, the Ares, not make Excalibur? Well, it's because they slacked off. They were bored. So they took a day off and decided to play around instead. Because of that, humans had no way of defeating Sephar and were wiped out along with the gods. A single mistake caused the downfall of Earth itself. The fairies lived in paradise, so they were safe from the massacre. The next day, they went down to Earth to see it destroyed, with not a single piece of land in sight. Sephar had stolen all of it. They were stranded. They couldn't go back to the inner sea of the planet, otherwise known as paradise, because they had sinned. Only the sinless can pass the gates. But a ray of hope appeared in the form of Cernunnos, the Celtic god of nature. He appeared with the only other land animal alive, which was his priestess. He had taken shelter in paradise with the priestess, which is why they were alive. They were sent to reprimand him, and make them atone for what the fairies had done. So, he became their god. The fairies were grateful and made offerings for whatever they wanted. There was no land, so they offered their joy, their wish to the god. They decided to poison the god and kill him for more of it, using his corpse as land itself. Now, they were living in good conditions. The priestess that was crying and mourning was useful to them as well. A human was useful, but one wasn't enough. So, they ripped her apart, flesh by flesh, skin by skin. Everything they could, they sliced into pieces, very carefully as to keep her alive using a spell. And using those pieces, they made new humans. Every human that we see in Fairy Britain is a result of her genetic material. Thus did the Isle of Britain came into being. Thus did the great mistake begin. May the 6 fairies find salvation. May the 6 fairies be cursed for all time. The poison they made him drink was their joy, their wish. No matter how long they waited, no land appeared in the vastless sea. They blamed it on Cernunnos. He must have been too weak, they thought. His priestess was no better. She was always scolding them, telling them to straighten up, to act like adults. So, they had no choice but to kill the both of them if they wanted comfort. And so, their life began. Those 6 fairies went on to create the 6 clans. I'm not sure which one was the exception. Just by existing, they could make new fairies. When fairies die, they turn into land, so the land of Fairy Britain was an ever-expanding mass of corpses. Very Aztec? Norse? In time, Cernunnos' body was covered by the remains of the dead fairies, sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And that is the origin story of Fairy Britain. The fairies are innocent, yet cruel. They're like children if they all had superpowers. Most have no empathy. It's why they harassed and hated Caltria so much. The fact that they were better off than her didn't matter. All that mattered was that she was special. That made them envious. Again, they are children in all but power and appearance. There are exceptions, but most are incredibly reactionary. They aren't evil, just idiots, still lacking empathy despite having long lifespans. Just know that most characters don't actually know about the origin story of the fairies. We learned all of this near the end of the Lost Belt. End of study. Hopefully you understood fairies by now, because now we get to the start of Caltria's journey. Now that we have reached the start of LV6, I probably won't go into as much detail about things as before, because from here, the story isn't just about Caltria, but others as well, so I will skip over the non-important stuff. Where we last left off was the Nameless Woods, in a village called Cornwall. As I already said, the Nameless Woods gets rid of your memories, leaving you stranded in it. While not true for Caltria, it was definitely the case for Ritsuka, the player. This is their first meeting point. Oh, and Isolde Best in class is here too. He's cool. At first, Ritsuka wakes up and mistakes Caltria for Mash, one of the people of Chaldea, the organization he works for. Caltria decides to go along with it and said, "Yeah, I'm Mash." Because Ritsuka had actually lost his memories, he bought it and started calling her Mash. As the three people in the tent slowly got to know each other, a nameless fairy, which is later revealed to have the name Hope, entered the tent to see how they're doing. This fairy happens to get bullied a lot. The residents of Cornwall don't really like her. Also at this point, Culture isn't really aware of who Ritsuka and Isolde Besting class are, or that they are here to prune this timeline. Though, with her Fae eyes, she figures out rather quickly. Either way, during their time in the village, they celebrate a lot. The fairies in Cornwall love partying, and for whatever reason, they like Ritsuka a lot as well. Also during this time, one of the fairies in Cornwall talks to Ritsuka and tells him that he's a great person, and then he just kind of starts crying. Kinda funny, just want to mention that. Maybe all we need in life is just someone to come tell us, hey, you're doing great. You know what? You, the person watching, you're doing great. I am proud of you. I hope you just do the best you can. Anyway, they stay in Cornwall for quite a while, mostly making friends with the nameless fairy who is in the process of becoming a Morse. What is a Morse? When fairies die, they turn into land, trees, whatever counts as nature. But if they lose their purpose, then they turn into Moors. It's a curse that was casted on them because of their sin. Fairies that have lost their name are at a bigger risk of becoming Moors. Once a fairy turns into a Morse, they can infect other fairies through contact alone. This curse doesn't affect humans, which is why humans are sometimes drafted to be soldiers to fight the Moors. It's probably why Woodwose thought it would be a good idea to burn Tintagel. Otherwise, they might have turned into Moors. In short, think of the Moors as fairy zombies. Which is why at some point, Culture gives the nameless fairy her own name, because she doesn't want to associate herself with it anymore. Though that was short-lived. Back in Cornwall, one day every fairy found out that Ritsuka is actually a human, not a fairy. Fairies like humans. A lot. But Cornwall doesn't have any of them. So, what happens when a crazy race like the fairies, in a state of boredom, sees a human that could satisfy their childlike boredom? Obviously, they decide to tear him apart limb from limb so that they can all have a piece of human. So they fight and kill and massacre each other for a tiny piece of human. Fortunately for Culture and the gang, that keeps them busy. They start fleeing the village with the nameless fairy, but near the end, the fairy also goes insane, becoming a full-on Morse. She was alone and abused in Cornwall for centuries. If anyone deserves a human, it's her. So she attacks, and the gang fights back. At some point during the fight, suddenly the nameless fairy gets assassinated, and the person who did it was, quote-unquote, Merlin, or at least sounded like him to Culture. And she was right, kind of. As you should know by now, this Merlin is Oberon, and also the same person who taught Culture magecraft for a year. Here, he even introduces himself as Oberon. Culture doesn't connect the dots and doesn't realize that Merlin and Oberon are the same person. There's a lot more to them, but we will get to all of that later. For now, just know that Culture, Oberon, and Ritsuka make a very important trio. Remember the prophecy? The one that talks about Fairy Britain? Well, now I want to get into the continuation of it. A city of iron, a sea of soot. When the calamity recedes, her pilgrimage begins. Chosen by the staff of selection, the savior, guarded by travelers from afar, shall reach the throne. The true king shall arrive at the throne. Accept now this bloodied crown. Ring, ring, like raging thunder, like weeping flame. Let us hearken to the 6 bells ringing, blaze the path of the true king. Ere the red calamity catches us, ere the black calamity devours us. Indolent and derelict though we may be, we are the scions of the free Fae. Never have we wished for anything, but still we desire a shining future. Now, let's decipher this. The first few lines talk about Norwich, the city of blacksmiths, filled with Earthland fairies. Supposedly, that's where her pilgrimage starts, after repelling some calamity. The next line is talking about her legitimacy. She has the staff of selections and is being accompanied by the Chaldeans, which to Fae Britain are foreign entities. They will reach the throne. Now, who is the true king? I don't think it's Caltria. At no point in the story does she come close to being anything like a king. And you know what, even when she does, it's after a lot of this. It also says king, not queen, which is why I think it might be Cnoc, the sole member of the King clan. It fits, and after Morgan dies, she does take the bloodied crown. Though the bloody crown part might just be talking about how Cnoc dies right after becoming king. It might also be talking about the king of the Lost Spells, which puts Cernunnos and Vortigern into the mix as well. Though it's probably not those two. Something I haven't talked about are the bells of pilgrimage. There are 6 of them, and Caltria has to ring all of them. Every time she rings one, she becomes stronger and also unlocks some memories. So, what exactly are they? Well, they are actually the corpses of the original 6 fairies, possibly replacements as well. Each bell signifies forgiveness, and the clan leaders are asking for it, which is what ringing the 6 bells is talking about. It's about regret and forgiveness. Blaze the path of the true king is also talking about this true king, which should be Cnoc, Cernunnos, Vortigern, Caltria, I'm not sure. The red calamity is Melgin, which isn't important to this video. And the black calamity is Barghest, which you already know her. Next is talking about the fairies and their incompetence, and how they all come from the original 6. And then it ends with them desiring a better future. Now, that must be the end of the prophecy, right? Well, there are 4 parts that Ainzel apparently scrapped. After the Norwich line, it goes, "The harbor shall return to the empty shore, but the calamity shall vanish into the distant sky." What does the empty shore mean? Oberon thinks it's about the destruction of Norwich, but most likely it's just talking about how the calamity was repelled, and then turned silent. The round fortress shall burn, and the bell of water shall appear. This happens after the legitimacy part. If you have read the story, this part is easy. It's talking about how Ainzel will die and turn into a bell. Very simple. Confessed sinners shall make the acquaintance of the guillotine. This is after the Bloody Crown part. Most likely, it talks about how after the 6 spells are wrong, everything will start going horribly wrong, and how every last fairy will die, one way or another. After the red and black calamity part, it goes, having fulfilled her role, the child of prophecy shall say farewell to her home. I don't think this one needs any explanation. Which marks the end of the prophecy. Some of these lines are really weird, so I had to really think about their meanings. I think I got them right, but it's fine, you can just comment if you think I was wrong. Now that we have gone through all of this, I think the best way to go about this video would be the dynamics Caltria has with the characters in the Lost Belt. So that's what I'm gonna do, otherwise this video will be over 5 hours long. So let's get through them, one by one. I feel it best to save the longer ones for last. So let's start with Tristan, the Tomlin one. She's probably the Tomlin Caltria has the most connections to, even more than Barghest. With Barghest, it's more of a petty dislike, while with Tomlin Tristan, it's more like complete disdain. The things didn't start that way at first. Their first meeting was in Gloucester, where Caltria was dragging Ritsuka around the city to show him around. They arrived at a boutique that really caught Caltria's eye, and next to them was Tomlin Tristan. Neither knew each other, so neither knew that they were enemies. Something interesting about Tomlin Tristan is that she hates every fairy with a passion, despite being one. But because Caltria isn't exactly a fairy from Fae Britain, she doesn't hate her at all. They make small talk and actually get along. That is until we get to the auction. The reason why Tomlin Tristan and the main gang were in Gloucester was because of this auction, and the main draw of this auction was the Child of Prophecy. Not really, but just Muramasa. Even though he was kind of an enemy to the Chaldeans, he was weirdly trustworthy. So the Chaldeans decided to bid for him, and Caltria took charge. So a bidding war begins with a mysterious woman who is soon revealed to be Tomlin Tristan. The bidding war goes basically nowhere, so the person in charge of the auction, Murian, told them to fight. Murian announces the mysterious woman as Tomlin Tristan, which shocks Caltria. But Murian didn't stop there and revealed the identity of Caltria as well. Tomlin Tristan wants to kill the Child of Prophecy because she wants to make Morgan proud. So from here on out, the relationship between Caltria and her goes south quick. They fight and Tomlin Tristan loses. She also just so happens to be a sore loser, so the friendship they had up to this point became unsalvageable. She throws a fit as Caltria disses her to oblivion. Murian convinces Tomlin Tristan to leave, but things don't end there. She gets beaten again a decent while later during an ambush she tried to pull. She gets so pissed that she traps Ritsuka and Caltria in the Garden of Lost Phil, which we will get to later. After this, Tomlin Tristan starts succumbing to a course from a completely different subplot involving Beryl, where she starts rotting alive, but that's not important to this video. If things were even slightly different, Caltria and Tomlin Tristan would have been friends. If Caltria didn't have this destiny, this prophecy, and if Tomlin Tristan got an actual therapist, they would have a good chemistry. most of Caltria's relationships are controlled by her prophecy, including Gareth. During the fight between Caltria and Tomlin Tristan, Caltria got a fan, and that follower was Gareth. Though until the gang gets to Drake River, Gareth mostly just stalks them. As soon as they meet, Gareth declares that she wants to be a squire to Caltria. Gareth doesn't really know where she herself is from and what clan she belongs to. All she knows is that she wants to protect people, and she believes that Caltria is gonna lead her down that path. They instantly get along, and Gareth immediately becomes a part of the gang, being the sweet, hardworking one of the group. She also gets appointed as Caltria's knight, which is cute. At some point, the gang reaches Londinium, which is the headquarters of the rebel army. The rebel army solely exists to overthrow Morgan, and it's led by a human by the name of Percival. We will get to him as well. For now, know that Londinium becomes the gang's main base of operations, and an important place to defend. At some point during their travels, the gang are forced to split, some continuing the quest while others defend Londinium, and Gareth decides to do just that. She couldn't abandon the people of Londinium, so the journey continues for a while without Gareth. They ring a few bells but get stuck. They had around 5 bells but were missing one. The bell of the Mirror Clan was nowhere to be found. That is until Mash, which had gone through her own separate journey for a long time, tells them what exactly the bells are. And if you remember the prophecy and my explanation of the bells of pilgrimage, you know where this is going. Caltria asks Percival where Gareth is, and he tells her that she's in Londinium. And right after, they get the news that Londinium was attacked. Some of the rebels in Londinium turned out to be spies and helped with a siege against Londinium. And the only somewhat powerhouse left protected was Gareth. Gareth starts to fight every spy and traitor, mostly by herself, trying to save every fairy and human residing in Londinium, which leads her into saving 2 children in a pinch. So now, she was forced to fight while keeping 2 children in bad states safe. Though that didn't last long, because out of nowhere, the strongest Tomlin, called Meligene, flew straight into the battlefield and knocked Gareth out instantly. And because of that, she hit her head hard enough to remember who exactly she was. Her name wasn't Gareth. She was a Mirror Clan fairy, and not just any regular one. She was their leader. She was Ainzel, the one who predicted the prophecy. She tried to save everyone with her prophecy, but now it was too late. The traitors had pretty much slain every rebel in Londinium, including the children. She fought and fought, taking out as many traitors as possible, and eventually fell. She died with Londinium, and out of her sprouted the 6th and final bell Caltria had to ring. This death affected Caltria greatly. Gareth was the only fairy that always believed in her, one of the only people she truly was friends with. The round fortress shall burn, and the bell of water shall appear. This was within prediction. Ainzel knew this would happen, and Caltria figured it out a little too late. Actually, not really. There was no saving Gareth or Ainzel now that we know her real name. There was no 6th spell, not until Ainzel died. Once again, This prophecy took a friend from her, a real important one at that. This death leads Caltria into a confrontation she has with Oberon, but that comes later. For now, let's talk about a different tragedy. A different friend that Caltria had to lose in this godless lost belt. Cnoc was the sole member of the King clan, the only clan to directly oppose Morgan. She was strong and capable, enough to gather a large following in Edinburgh. They first met 5 years before Chaldea's arrival to the Lost Belt, during the time Tintagel was still a thing. Caltria was sent to Gloucester to join a beauty contest, in which she got last place. Cnoc was also here to spread her name and become more well known. Basically, a political campaign. And she won, but she wasn't truly satisfied with it. What the judges considered beauty was laughable, only seeing the outside and not the pride on the inside. Basically, she was not like the other girls. She was unique and quirky. As Caltria was thinking about how her life possibly could have went so wrong, she was noticed by Cnoc. When Cnoc first saw her before the competition, she thought that Caltria would for sure make it to the finals with her, but was surprised when during the competition, she didn't spot Caltria. Cnoc thought that Caltria left the contest because it was stupid, not knowing that Caltria was eliminated early. So after Cnoc started getting ahead of herself and forcing better dresses onto Caltria, Caltria admitted that she lost early. Cnoc was sorry and told her that she thought that Caltria would definitely make it big. Caltria was really touched until Cnoc told her that she must have been wrong, and that Caltria was so unimpressive that she mistook a zero for a hero. Despite their snarky remarks, they quickly became friends, and also kind of rivals. Cnoc was the first real friend Caltria made. Not mentor, friend. Because of her Fae eyes, she could tell that Cnoc was interested in Caltria for real, and held no malice. Years later, when Caltria starts traveling with Ritsuka and the gang, they come across Cnoc, which is where their friendship is revealed. At some point, they even go to war. Caltria and the gang versus Cnoc and her army in a chocolate-making fight. So yeah, they got along. As Muramasa put it, Caltria is meek but also a headache, while Cnoc is loud but also sweet. They are opposites but fit together really nicely. Then we get to the big turning point in the Lost Belt. At the end of part 2, Morgan dies and the clan leaders decide to hold a celebration for their victory. The gang gets invited and Cnoc would be there too. And in the start of part 3, the celebration begins. In this event, Cnoc was going to become the Queen of Fae Britain. Everyone is finally relieved. The fight is all over, and people are just having a good time. But things didn't go as planned. One of the main antagonists of LB6 is a fairy by the name of Aurora, the leader of the Wind clan. She helps us out a lot and even lends us Red a bit. She seems like a really warm and kind person. But in actuality, pretty much everything that goes wrong in Fae Britain is kind of her fault. I won't talk about Morgan in this video, if you were wondering, because the video would be too long. But if I ever make a Morgan video, I will go into more detail about why Aurora might just be the Vince McMahon of fairies. But for context, Aurora wants to be the most popular fairy. She wants everyone to basically worship her as the goddess of beauty. So when Nocnaria starts becoming queen, Aurora decides to get silly. She gives everyone wine. Ritsuka starts a massive chain where he doesn't want to drink wine, so because of that Mash doesn't want to drink wine, which makes Caltria not want to drink wine. You get the point. Basically, the entire gang decides not to drink wine, but Nocnaria drinks it. After she drinks the wine, some of her people started slandering her, telling everyone in the celebration about how terrible of a person she truly is. Just as she starts to defend herself, she starts coughing up blood. The wine was poisoned. Nocnaria's time was limited. Cnoc is only strong because of the loyalty her people have for her. If they turn away from that loyalty, Nocnaria gets physically weaker, and some of her people were Aurora's spies. So when they betray her and spread the seed of doubt, Nocnaria starts succumbing to the poison. This was all planned by Aurora. Caltria and the gang start fighting, but Nocnaria was already pierced by too many weapons. After some final words, she dies in the arms of Caltria. And from here, everything in Fae Britain goes wrong. Everything. This time, it was her best friend, her rival, that was taken away from her in a tragedy. Being the child of prophecy was the worst thing to happen to Caltria. Every relationship she makes ends in a tragedy. It's not unfair, it's her reality. Now, I want to talk about one of the less tragic characters in terms of relationships. One of the only important humans in Fae Britain, and that is Percival. Percival was the leader of the rebel army in Londinium. When we first meet him, it's after he saved Gareth. He is one of the characters that some believed to be the child of prophecy, because he also just turned 16, despite how he looks. He's a really kind and noble soul, so he also fits into the party rather well. The one who helped him build his army is Oberon, because he kind of does everything in this Lost Belt. From here, he becomes a trusted comrade. He has the Spear of Selection as a weapon, which is really harmful to pretty much anything. It's strong, incredibly so. Though its one drawback is that it ages the user by 10 years every time its special move is used. And he has already used it once. Another thing is that humans in Fae Britain can only live to around 30 to 40 years old. Later on, he uses the spear's power again against Woodvoes, which was probably the strongest fairy in Fae Britain at that point. Still, an inspiration to many, including Caltria. He isn't a fairy. All he has going for him is a measly human body. Yet, he's determined to do what he feels is right. Later on, after the assassination of Nocnaria and the beginning of the end, the gang gets attacked by Melusine, which is actually a really important person to Percival. Melusine, at this point, is insane and just flying around causing havoc. As the gang was in the sky flying with a ship, which they have, Melusine starts chasing after them. Not them exactly, but Caltria. So Sherlock, which finally could do something, says that they should lure Melusine with Caltria and take her down in close range. But Caltria can't do that, because she needs to protect the ship using her magecraft. So Percival decides to become the decoy instead, because of the fact that Percival is now physically 36, basically at the end of his lifespan. He could lure Melusine in the place of Caltria. He is an artificial child of prophecy, but that's not too important to this video. Also, him and Melusine have this whole sibling thing going on, so if anyone can lure Melusine in, it's him. The gang and Melusine start fighting, and as soon as Melusine starts trying to get away, Percival uses his spear one final time, striking the dragon in the heart, and in turn, he starts turning to dust. Fae Britain humans can't live until 46, so he instantly turned into ashes, killing the most important person in his life. While he doesn't have as much to do with Caltria, his sentiment is important to this video. Before his final confrontation, he tells everyone not to think too badly about Fae Britain. There are good fairies and bad fairies, just like humans. There's no evil race. Even if this land is filled with tragedy, it's still a beautiful kingdom. A sentiment that Oberon also shares. Just because it's dying doesn't mean it was wrong. He's an optimist, a dreamer. At first, while his ramblings might come off as naive, if you look a bit into things, his words become far more reasonable. The fairies aren't evil, just prone to influence, more so than even humans. Let's just go over the leaders they have. Cnoc is probably the only good and reasonable one. Other than her, you have Morgan, which is vengeful and hates the fairies, Murian, which is vengeful and hates most fairies, even causing a genocide near the end, Spirigan, which isn't even a fairy but a proper human history capitalist, Aurora, which is Aurora, and finally Woodvose and Bogart. Bogart is mostly fine as a ruler, but he has this dream of being wild like Woodvose, which is like a ticking time bomb at worst. And Woodvose, while wanting to be more civilized like Bogart, is too temperamental enough to kill his own man at a moment's notice. Even if that wasn't enough, there are two entities that are constantly trying to end Fae Britain, in Cernunnos and Vortigern. Under such circumstances, Fae Britain's fate was always going to be bleak. The good ones were going to be a minority because their leaders weren't good examples to them. They're like children. They're innocent but cruel. They don't really get taught empathy, but they do get taught envy. Again, they aren't evil, just incredibly unfortunate. Who knows, maybe if proper human history also had such people on top while also being targeted by two powerful ghosts, we too might not have turned out well. Again, not important to Caltria specifically, but I think it is good to have in the video as a perspective. Now we get to the final grown-up that Caltria looked up to and relied on, and that is Muramasa. Muramasa isn't exactly a Lost Bowl 6 character. He had an important part in Shimosa back during 1.5 and also showed up in LB5, but it's in LB6 where his character really shines. He's an alien god apostle, but his heart isn't really in it, which is why when he gets rescued in the auction, he goes along with Caltria and the gang, becoming one of the core members and also one of the heavy hitters of the crew. After the whole LB5 fiasco, he was ordered to invade LB6 and kill Morgan. That didn't go as planned. Which is lucky for the gang because they also want to stop Morgan. So their interests just kind of aligned. Teaming up was not really a surprise. Throughout LB6, Muramasa is the adult of the group, keeping the band sane. Despite his looks, he's a grandpa, through and through. Also, he's a blacksmith on top of that, so Caltria easily sees Hector in him. For now though, let's just go back to the Drake River incident where Gareth was first introduced. In it is a monster called, well, the Drake. The Drake lures people into its river for crossbreeding, the man as seeds and the woman as wet nurses. To do this, it tempts people with what they want most. Of course, even while knowing this, almost the entire gang falls victim to it. Riabh sees a 2-meter long carrot, Ritsuka a bag of grails, Gareth a giant Altria plushie, and Da Vinci by an old fossil. Oberon sees the river and his wishes sold out. Go watch my Oberon video. And Muramasa is old and old people are weird, so there isn't really anything that would lure him. Caltria does get lured in though, and the item that lures her in surprises Muramasa. Out of all things out there, the thing that lures Caltria in is a hair clip, likely the one Hector offered her when he was alive. The thing that she wanted for herself badly, but knew would be taken away from her if the fairies saw it. Muramasa does dive in and save everyone after the fact, but know that if he wasn't there, the journey would be over. Which could be said about a lot of different characters within the gang. Whenever Caltria looks down and frustrated, Muramasa is the first to notice, probably after Oberon. Again, he's reliable, maybe even the most reliable member of the gang. And just like the rest of the gang, he wholeheartedly believes in Caltria, more confidently than most. Now let's talk about the things that happened after Nocnaria's death. Because of some shenanigans, the gang was forced into Avalon, where the end of Caltria's pilgrimage is. They meet Merlin, the real one this time, and he helps them get there. Also at this point, Caltria still doesn't know that Oberon was the Merlin in her childhood, so when she sees this Merlin, she gets greatly confused because this Merlin in no way resembles the one she knew. While she didn't see Merlin back then, she still got a feel for him and how he is. Of course, that was actually Oberon pretending to be Merlin, not the actual one that she's now meeting for the first time. Either way, Merlin takes them to Avalon, also called Paradise, the land of hope with no true evil. Though this one is mostly a shadow of its real self, only having the forge where the 6 fairies were meant to create Excalibur and not much else. To reach it, they need to go through a few checkpoints. It's basically a defensive mechanism, making sure that only the right people can pass through. Each of these checkpoints is about the Fairy of Paradise, which in this case is Caltria. Everything she has gone through and everything she has lived through will appear as a sort of obstacle. As Merlin put it, from a cold, unforgiving winter to a warm, fun spring. Basically, her backstory that I went through at the start of this video. Her winter, summer, autumn, and spring memories. And Merlin also reveals the purpose of a Fairy of Paradise, which includes the Child of Prophecy, which is Caltria. Their duty is to make the sacred sword Excalibur. This is for a few good reasons, but for this video, or I guess for Fairy Britain, only one is important. Each bell represented regret, the old clan leaders acknowledging their guilt. And the fairy who rings all of them becomes the holy sword. In short, it's a sacrifice. Morgan was also a fairy of paradise, but as I said, I won't go into her in this video. If you remember, when I talked about the bells, I mentioned that each time Caltria rang one, she would become stronger and gain memories. By the fourth bell, she already knew. Caltria planned on coming to Avalon by herself after Knocknaria's ceremony, but she didn't know that things would go so wrong. Merlin also tells them about what is happening outside in Fairy Britain and how it's burning away. The main threat they need to face is Cernunnos. Muramasa has anti-divine abilities, so he's basically the gang's trump card, as pointed out by Caltria herself. Right after, Caltria disappears. Every time this happens, the gang needs to fight the physical manifestations of her memories. Thankfully, every checkpoint they pass, those memories are less painful to Caltria, which means that the memories themselves get weaker. It starts with winter, then autumn, and then summer. Now, what about her spring memories? Well, we will get to that, it's not time yet. To make the Holy Sword, everything about Caltria needs to disappear. Every experience, memory, soul, her very fate are all materials to make the Holy Sword. And again, Caltria knows this. Even if Merlin clarifies that it's not sacrifice but equivalent exchange, it's still pretty much a sacrifice. After going through all of the trials, they can finally enter the forge. Ritsuka is obviously pissed off about everything that Caltria had to live through, and Muramasa is really happy about that, telling him that whatever happens, he will handle it. They reach it, and Caltria now has to stand in the center of the forge to end her fate, her misery, her cursed prophecy. She confesses about her hatred of her life, Fairy Britain, fairies, humans, her duty, everything. Her fears, exhaustion, how she was too terrified of being honest in case she disappointed those around her. Even so, the fact that her doing this will end Fairy Britain saddens her. Even if she hated them, she knew that every fairy honestly wished for salvation. Even if they are sinners, the fate of Fairy Britain wasn't all their fault. Everyone is the same. Behind their lies and masks, everyone wants to be saved. For the fairies of Fairy Britain, it just wasn't meant to be. Caltria will fulfill her duty, not for anyone else or for the sake of the prophecy, but for herself, for the one thing that always drove her forward, probably the same thing that drove Ritsuka forward. She starts dissolving. Her memories and sense of self would be next. Her existence was ending. She only wished that she could know where exactly her motivations came from. What exactly the thing that drove her to this point was. And luckily for her, there was someone that could give her more time. Someone that could take her place. Kind of. And that was Muramasa. Senji Muramasa. In the real world, He was one of the most famous sword makers of all time. It's the same in Fate. In the Nosuvers, he is still one of the greatest smiths of all time. If anyone can take Kaltria's place and forge the holy sword, it's him. If he goes through with this, he will die in her place. But that's fine for him. If he's gonna die in any way, it better be while making the craziest sword ever, using parts of Kaltria as material. Doing so would minimize the damage on Kaltria, making sure that no material goes to waste. And with that, Kaltria would survive, maybe even getting stronger thanks to being exposed to all of this. Kaltria asks him why he would do this, why he would take her place, and he tells her that it's because he wants to. To him, Kaltria deserved better, a bit more time at the very least, which is why he took her place, with his only regret being that he couldn't make her that beret. And so Muramasa vanishes. His sacrifice isn't as sad because, unlike pretty much every other character in this Lost Boat, he was a servant, so he had already lived once. Even so, he was very important to basically everyone up to that point. As Merlin would say, equivalent exchange. We are getting closer to the end of this video, but before the real stuff, I want to go over one other character really important to Kaltria's journey. A character that never actually appears in Fae Britain, only appearing in Kaltria's dreams when she rings the bells. And her name is Artoria. Her proper human history counterpart, also known as King Arthur, but woman. She too had a destiny. She was also born with a purpose, born to be a king, to rule over Britain, the king of Camelot, trusted by all, more righteous than most kings could dream of, surrounded by capable allies while wielding the holy sword Excalibur. Everything that Kaltria didn't want to be. Everything that Kaltria didn't want to know about. When she first saw Altria, she wanted to throw up. A king who lived for others and not for herself. Kaltria was appalled by that. She didn't want to end up like her. Didn't want to live a similar existence as her. Altria was born to be a king and fully accepted that fact despite her tragic end. Kaltria never wanted to be the child of prophecy. She didn't want to live for anyone other than herself. She would be much happier just living a normal, uneventful life. While I said I won't go into Morgan, Kaltria thought that even Morgan must have been luckier than her. Morgan wanted to make her own dreamlike kingdom. She wanted to rule over Fae Britain with the people she loved. She had a goal, something to keep her steady on her feet despite all the pushback, even if she ended up becoming a tyrant. Kaltria, on the other hand, has no goal, no aspirations. She just wants to be free. She hates Fae Britain. She hates the fairies. She hates the humans. She hates everything attached to her life. Even so, she kept moving forward. Something inside her, something within her soul, kept pulling her along like a guiding light. And one of the biggest mysteries of LB6 is the truth behind that light. What exactly is it? What is it that is forcing her to continue forward? Well, the true nature of it was kept a mystery throughout all of LB6, only giving us little hints of what it could be. I will likely go over that and her spring memories after the next 2 segments. For now, let's just talk about the main trio of this lost belt: Caltria, Ritsuka, and Oberon. Ritsuka is a human, and not much more, but that humanity is what gives him strength. Feuerschwanz is all about humanity, and Ritsuka represents the most human-like side of humanity, I guess. By himself, he is nothing. He has no powers, no magecraft, and is only a little bit more intelligent than the normal person. And that is all because until the start of Feuerschwanz, he had led a very normal life. His greatest strengths are his endless determination and his sense of unity with the people around him. It's really easy for him to get along with people, even those who were his enemies. As the sole master of Chaldea, he is always surrounded by people more incredible than him, all remnants of the past. From Iskander, to Gilgamesh, to Mozart, to even someone like Jason. They are all better than him, yet he has to lead all of them to victory. Some are villains too, like Columbus, Kiara, and many more. Yet he still wants to understand them and get along with them, because who they are doesn't really matter to him. Everyone deserves respect. And also, a whole world is at stake. He has no time to be judgmental. It's only in the Lost Belts where he starts to waver a little. Knowing that he has to save proper human history, he needs to destroy many other worlds. Now, I want to get into the Garden of Lost Will. After Tomlin Tristan's second defeat, she traps both Ritsuka and Caltria in this magical prison called the Garden of Lost Will. As the name suggests, it's meant to destroy whatever will someone has and keep them trapped inside it forever by showing them illusions. Caltria instantly realizes what it is, and anytime she wants, she could cut the line, but she could probably hold on until things got that far. For now, she decided to observe. For her, instead of showing her illusions, it just showed her her life, her seasonal memories. How whenever someone asked her for something, she would say yes, otherwise they would kill her. You know, normal childhood. After a while, she got tired of it and decided to see how Ritsuka was doing. For Ritsuka, it showed him his greatest fear, abandonment, which leads into uselessness and worthlessness, some of the greatest fears people have. At this point, he has gotten too used to the struggle. He's a veteran, too used to the war, unable to go back to living normally. So in his delusions, he gets replaced. As soon as a replacement shows up, Chaldea lets go of him. When he trains just so that he's ready for the worst case scenario, they tell him, what's the point? When he's talking with them, they tell him that there's no point in what they are doing. And worst of all, they tell him not to care about the Lost Bolt residents. All the people he had to erase up to this point shouldn't matter to him. Caltria was getting sick just watching what the garden was showing Ritsuka, thinking that maybe she should do something about it. And then Oberon shows up. Whether you believe that this is Oberon or not is up to you, but I believe he is. Oberon starts analyzing Ritsuka about how even though he has done so much quote-unquote wrong, he still keeps moving forward. While his words are technically against Ritsuka, they can be sort of applied to Caltria as well. He keeps berating him, telling him, what is Ritsuka gonna do? Bear with it for now? It's not my fault I have to fight. It's not my fault I can't save anyone. Is he just gonna hold it all in because he can't look weak? So that people rely on him and believe in him? Does he truly believe that after all of this he can just go back to normal? Again, all of these can also be said about Caltria pretty much. She too is holding it all in, masking herself so that people don't realize just how hurt she is. She too is only hoping to be normal, to be salvaged. Just as Caltria was about to step in, Ritsuka started to stand up. Oberon told him to quit, which are the words he has been wanting to hear this whole time. He remembers the words that a certain doctor by the name of Romani Archimon once told him. A species will always want to continue, but individuals are different. All humans have two desires, to continue or to end. There is nothing wrong with desiring an end. Everything ends at one point. Everyone, at some point, will have to make peace with that. Ritsuka asked him, what should I aim for? To which Romani answered, don't try for a game over. Try for a game complete. Just live. Success, failure, happiness, sadness, it's fine to experience all of those. There is no shame in it. Just complete as much as you can. That is what he should aim for. Despite everything, Ritsuka can't give up, nor can Caltria. During his fight against Goetia, go watch my Goetia video, he said that his motivation is to live. That is the best answer for humanity, but not for himself. He still hasn't found the answer for himself, but he's young, he can figure it out. For now, he only wishes to live. Not survive, but live. Again, Ritsuka represents humanity. He might be bleeding, but his blood is bottomless. People say that he doesn't have a character, but the reality of it is that he doesn't have a backstory or a specialty. He really was just a regular guy until he joined Chaldea. Compared to so many other characters, that fact makes him feel mundane. He is a human, and that is all that he needs to be. After all that, the garden breaks, bringing both Caltria and Ritsuka back into the real world. Another character, Mash, broke the artifact that did all of that in a panic, and Caltria assured her that it was fine to break it. It wasn't too bad for Caltria because the garden was an object meant to eat away at people's will to live, which Caltria had none of. Ignoring that grim statement, Caltria was flabbergasted at how Ritsuka held on, almost getting mad over even worrying. Calming down, she tells him that he really never ran away, did he? Even back in Norwich, where their first big battle began, Ritsuka tells her that she was also the same, but he wasn't talking about Norwich, he was talking about her prophecy. This whole ordeal is what makes the relationship between Ritsuka and Caltria go from just another companion, or in Caltria's case, mostly just another liar, to someone that she really, and I mean really respects. Someone she felt a connection to, a relation. Someone like herself. As for Ritsuka, his admiration for Caltria really blooms near the end of the Lost Belt, when they get into Avalon, but even before that, he respected her greatly. To paint a picture of just how Caltria's perspective changed before all this, around the beginning of Lost Belt 6, Caltria asked Ritsuka if he's really okay with fighting for a world like his own. And he can either say that he likes it as much as any other guy, or that he has some concerns. Either way, she pities whatever answer he gives. Because of her Fae eyes, she couldn't help but see Ritsuka as just another liar. One that was kinder to her than most, but still a liar and a pretender. But after the Garden of Lost Will, her views on him changes just as much as Ritsuka's views of Caltria changes during Avalon. This part was meant to focus on the main trio, but this whole Ritsuka part took longer than expected. So let's have a few seconds of silence before we get into Caltria and Oberon. If you have watched my Oberon video, you should already know what he is. If not, I will keep it brief. He's a pretender, which means that nothing about him is truly true. Everything about him, to some extent, is a lie. He also isn't just Oberon, he's a weird fusion between proper human history Oberon and Lost World Vortigern. The personality and goals of both sides affect each other. Not different people, just different masks. All of this gets revealed at the very end, so for most of the Lost World, no one knows about this connection. He's a liar, but not by choice, at least all the time. His nature forces him to lie. For example, Merlin, the one Caltria talked to in her dream, was Oberon. He didn't need to lie, and you could say that him lying might have been in his plans from the get-go, but either way, the belief he had in her was genuine. He helped her because at first he pitied her. Over time, he started to care for her. And just like her, he also has Fae eyes. And funnily enough, because of his nature as a pretender, Caltria's Fae eyes don't work well on him, which is sus by itself. Just like Caltria, he too bears great hatred against Fae Britain, though he still kind of likes it. Throughout the Lost World, he kind of does everything, financially supporting Londinium, destroying the Fae Britain economy, that kind of stuff. He was also a great motivational speaker and a great gaslighter. While Caltria never finds the connection between him and the Merlin she talked to back during her childhood, they get close to each other anyway. Oberon, always encouraging Caltria, and also caring for Caltria more than he likes to admit. But I want to talk about a conversation they had when things were getting tense. Caltria had rung all the bells by this point, which means she knows about proper human history Artoria, the reality of her destiny, and much, much more. And if you remember, the sixth bell only appeared after the death of Gareth. So Caltria was very, very stressed, not in a healthy mental state. They were about to prepare for their final fight against Morgan, so it was before Knocknaria's coronation. Caltria was tired of all the lies and deceit. In proper human history, the fairies left humanity because they couldn't handle how deceitful humans got once they got more civilized and learned things such as language. The Fae Britain fairies, on the other hand, had lost their Fae eyes, so they couldn't tell lies from truth anymore. That was in their effort to become more like humanity. So they too started pretending. Such a world where not only a fairy like Caltria can tell lies from the truth, but also the meaning and reason behind those lies is a nightmare. She can see the true nature in everything, including lies meant to help her feel better, which is why she hates any and all kinds of lies. She needed some fresh air, so while people were getting ready for the war, she went out to feel a bit of loneliness. And soon, Oberon approached her. He saw how down she looked and told her that Gareth didn't abandon her in any way. Her death was in the prophecy. It was meant to happen. He also told her that everything is in place. They should win without any casualties and that they shouldn't have any spies in the army anymore. So there shouldn't be anyone hiding anything. Caltria didn't take kindly to that. While her Fae eyes couldn't discern Oberon's connection to Vortigern, they could see through his more regular lies, and Oberon did not mean what he said. He knew their odds were slim to none, even after all of their preparations. A lot of soldiers were gonna die. He is only comforting Caltria, and Caltria knew that Oberon was a liar to some extent. If you want to know about the full extent of his lies, just watch my Oberon video. Sorry, I promise this will be the last shameless plug. In short, he knew Nocnaria before anyone else yet pretended not to, didn't tell Ritsuka about Mash's whereabouts when she was separated from the main gang despite knowing where she was, and his involvement with the Queen's reinforcements for what was his army when they tried to siege Londinium for the first time, and how they never arrived. A lot happens in this Lost Bolt, so if you didn't read it, you won't know about any of this. For every example Caltria gave, Oberon put out a fair enough reason. Yes, he lied, but for the good of the journey. But it's still a lot of lies, so Caltria asks him, "Do you really want to defeat Morgan?" Little did she know, he probably wanted Morgan gone more than anyone else, but I digress. He tells her that he wants to take her favorite Britain down with every fiber of her being. Anyway, he tells her that if he needs to lie to make it happen, he will. And if you remember, Oberon also has Fae eyes, which is why he makes a really important statement. I'm not the only liar here, Altria. Just like how Caltria and Ritsuka have very big similarities, Caltria and Oberon share a good amount of similarities as well. Oberon was lying to make the journey work, and Caltria was lying to hide her frustrations. To her, it was never about saving Fae Britain. She couldn't care less about that, nor its residents. Her motives are entirely different, something that at that point even she didn't know. Caltria tries to deny it, but Oberon points out that this is just her guilt talking. Saving Fae Britain isn't exactly what it seems. As Muramasa once put it, every fairy yearns for absolution, for death. While the fairies might not know about everything that happened 1400 years ago, a part of the original six remains with them. Caltria is conflicted because she knows that voicing out her frustrations won't change anything. It's the same for Oberon. Whatever he needs to do doesn't matter. He will make sure to take Morgan down. Their talk ends with Oberon telling her to leave all this for later. And who knows, maybe once she starts getting honest, she will realize that nobody thinks that her feeling that way is a big deal anyway, and wouldn't hate her for it. While Oberon will turn out to be the big bad of LB6, he still forms genuine bonds with the people around him, and despite how much Caltria hates lies, she still cares for every last member of their party, even Regrabit. And her hatred for lies makes her a hypocrite, because not counting Oberon, at that point, she was the biggest liar of them all, which is rather funny. Leaving that aside, during the big battle against Morgan, the gang splits. Some as bait, and some to kill Morgan. But suddenly, Caltria's group, the one meant to bring down Morgan, found Morgan in the middle of the city. After a long and hard battle, they took her down. But something felt weird. Why was she just out in the middle of the battlefield? Why was she weaker than expected? Sure, she put up a really good fight, but things should have been tougher. Suddenly, a beam of light started coming down on Caltria, and at that last moment, Oberon pushed her away, taking the hit for himself. The Morgan they defeated was just a clone, nothing more. And there were dozens of those clones all over the battlefield. With the hit Oberon took, he supposedly died. Now that we know what happens at the end of the Lost Belt, we know that Oberon didn't actually die, but only took himself out of the equation. Why? Well, for a few reasons. For one, he had done everything he needed to do, so he didn't have to stay in the front lines anymore, and this was his perfect way out. No one, other than Ritsuka, would suspect a thing. And also, because he truly cared for Caltria. There was a good chance that the beam of light would have ended Caltria, so to him, it all worked out. Now, we have looked at every character important to Caltria and her development. We can finally get into her spring memories, the light, but for now, her end. After Muramasa's sacrifice and after the gang takes down two of the big three calamities, it was finally time for them to take down Cernunnos. Cernunnos was a god, so it wasn't gonna be an easy battle. Everyone was nervous and Caltria was honest with just how terrified she was. Yet they had no choice but to continue. After the defeat of Cernunnos, Caltria would be taken back to Avalon, the place of her birth. Ritsuka and Caltria were way closer at this point, truly understanding each other. Caltria assures Ritsuka that as long as he has hope, Avalon le Fae will help him. If you didn't know, Avalon le Fae means Fairy of Paradise. Basically, she means that she has got his back, not just to save Britain, but possibly even the world. After some more wholesome talk, it was time to fight Cernunnos. They fight. The whole remaining gang fights him, but they just can't seem to take him down. No matter how much they fight, Cernunnos regenerates. During the confusion, Caltria runs to Morgan's castle. If you have watched my Artoria video, yes I'm a liar, have one more plug, you will know that Morgan has Rongominiads. Actually, she has quite a few of them, and they all are crazy strong. Caltria figures that if they want to win against Cernunnos, they will need the power of those Rongominiads. In the castle remain no life, no human, no fairy, just Caltria. In 5 to 10 minutes, not only did she have to get to the throne room, but also had to analyze Morgan's magecraft so she could use her weapons. Cernunnos had every right to be mad. He had every right to seek vengeance because of what the fairies did to him, but he still could have chosen a better way. Instead of simply punishing them, he could have made a system to forgive their sins, a way for them to repent. With those thoughts in mind, she started working on the throne. It really was a genius piece of work, something only a prodigy could have pulled off. But there was one problem. The whole system was made for Morgan alone, no one else. She was the one meant to operate the sacred lances. So when Caltria took control of them, her body started spasming, dilating her blood vessels, nerves, and bones. Her entire body was burning of pain, but she could still keep going. She fired the lances, yet they barely scratched her. She had to try again, this time more recklessly. If she put any more energy into the magecraft, she would surely die. But that was fine. She was living on borrowed time anyway, thanks to Muramasa's sacrifice. Because of everything that happened in Avalon, she was basically an essence of Excalibur. If she poured her soul and entire being into it, the spell would become much stronger. So she transferred the spell onto herself, becoming a weapon. Every fiber of her being was on fire. Every nerve on her body was losing sense because of the pain. Yet she had to keep going. She shot, piercing Cernunnos wide open, and for the sake of the fairies, asked for his forgiveness. His core was in view, and the Chaldeans could kill him now, which, after a little bit more time, they did. Caltria, on the other hand, faded away, dying on the spot, with her staff resting across the throne, its duty fulfilled. She never found out what the light was, what her motivations were. The time Muramasa had bought her was short-lived, but still valuable. But that begs the question, what was the light in her dreams? She couldn't figure it out, but could we? The light was shining brightly in a storm of malice as long as she knew. Because of her Fae eyes, she saw the world as a storm of malice filled with deceit, which is what manifested in her dreams. A flicker of virtue among the sea of vice, a bright future awaiting me. No matter what happened, even when Merlin was taken away from her, even when Hector died for her, even when no one believed in her, that star shone brightly. The one thing that never changed, that remained the same. It would never point her way or help her, but it would still shine brilliantly with possibilities. She didn't move forward for the world, for peace, or even for herself. She didn't want to betray that star, the sun that remained absolute. But it was all over now. Countless voices cursing her for ending Fae Britain. Voices that loathed her for fulfilling her duty, shaming her, decrying her, blaming her. In the end, there is no such thing as a star in a storm of evil. Now, she had lost her will, but within that storm did lay a gentle hand meant to comfort her, belonging to a fairy named Hope, the nameless fairy back in Cornwall, a fairy that had found her own starlight in the storm right near the end. Not seen it, but straight up found it. Another entity that believed in her. Caltria is no different from her. She might technically be built different, but she's still a soul with hopes and dreams. She can never find a better reason, but that's fine. That one reason is enough. She doesn't want to abandon the star or her feelings. After all, it's what kept her, and also one of her best friends, dreaming. Now, what exactly does any of what I just said mean? I know it all might sound like the ramblings of an illegal substance-addicted person, but trust me, it makes sense. This all basically happens after her death in a sort of dream afterlife kind of thing. Something like that. So what does that make the star? Well, it's hope. Not the character, but the concept. She always held true hope, despite the malice of the world around her. It's why the glimmer goes away when she loses her will, because she has no hope left. But little did she know, she was the star of someone else, the nameless fairy. While giving her name away might not have been a big deal to Caltria, for the nameless fairy, it was everything. It was her salvation, what really saved her. So, in a way, you could say that the star also represents salvation, which the nameless fairy had found. And that nameless fairy, in that afterlife, decided to comfort Caltria for what she did, even though every other fairy, and possibly human, hated her for fulfilling the prophecy. She couldn't stop, not yet. She still had unfinished business. Now, she was rather aware of the star's significance, but there was more to do. But what exactly? Well, back in the forge, she basically became a sort of part of Excalibur. While this Excalibur couldn't protect its own world, it could protect proper human history. So after Muramasa forged it, it was given to Chaldea to be used in a later battle. After Caltria used all of her being against Cernunnos, her body was somehow offered to the sacred sword, becoming the sword itself, a device meant to aid humanity in opposing threats to the planet. She doesn't exactly become a part of Chaldea unless you count the whole gotcha thing, and I do know that she doesn't appear in future story arcs unless you count events. I think. I don't know, I have only read Tangska, but I know that she isn't there at least. Instead, she became a nameless king, standing at the edge of the world, but not the center, exhaling hope with her presence alone, protecting the planet if need be. Basically, Excalibur forged the connection between her and proper human history. At least that's how I read all this, I could be wrong. This part is insanely cryptic. Now that she had become that device, there was one final threat she had to get rid of in the final battle of LB6. Okay, so before we end this segment, there is another way you can perceive all this. This is future cooling speaking without a script, so it's gonna be good. Anyway, what I've just talked about is more of a philosophical way of looking at it, while what I'm about to say now is more literal. It came to me in a dream, so it's legit. So, the light. Here I just said that it's the concept of hope. But another way you could look at it is, by looking at her Fae eyes. Her Fae eyes make it so that she sees the true nature of things. Basically, someone is talking and they're just lying. And she can tell that not only they are lying, but also why they're lying and everything else about that lie. The very truth of that lie. So, the storm of malice is what she dreamed of when she was sleeping, because she saw the world itself as a storm of malice. And dreams, in a very weird way you could say, are our brains lying to us, they're not true, you could say. So basically, instead of having nightmares about, like normal people, she perceived those nightmares as the storm of malice, and that hope, that light, was the little bit of light left inside her, was a little bit of hope left inside it, I mean. So, that hope is actually just a manifestation. I mean, that light is actually just a manifestation of her hope. So, you could say that because of her Fae eyes, she could see the true nature of her dreams. That light was something she had from, like, her childhood, I guess, or something like that. And it's what motivated her. Basically, that hope, that light, was at one point there. And because it was there, it appeared in her dreams. And because she saw it in her dreams, she gained hope. So basically, she was hoping because of the hope she had when she was younger. Basically like an Ouroboros, but, the light feeding the light. The light feeding the hope, something like that, I guess. This is why I carry a script. Anyway, now, there is a problem with this theory, and it's to do with Hope, the character. She is a Fae Britain fairy, and Fae Britain fairies do not have Fae eyes. Yet, Hope also had a storm of malice, apparently. Her own version of storm of malice, I guess. But one thing that you could say is that she's a Wing Clan fairy, and the only other Wing Clan fairy we know is Murian. And Murian is very old. She's from before her clan got genocided to oblivion. And this fairy could also be from that time. And we do know that Murian has some semblance of Fae eyes. She can sort of tell. So, because of that, I'm just gonna say that, Hope, the character, possibly also has something like that. Who knows? Maybe she's even older than Murian, which means her Fae eyes would be stronger. So, this is another way of looking at it, I guess. Yeah. After Cernunnos was defeated, the final ally that Chaldea made disappeared. They were all tired and thought that the battle was truly over. Everyone other than Ritsuka. Ritsuka's suspicions about Oberon became a reality as he revealed his inner nature. He, or I guess a part of him, started eating away at Britain, devouring it into an endless void. And he wasn't gonna stop there either. He wanted to take down proper human history as well. Think of it like a black hole in the shape of a worm. And soon, it devoured the Chaldeans as well, taking them in its endless, inescapable hole. It was like the Garden of Lost Will, forcing everything in it to lose their will. Because of that, everyone other than Ritsuka, and of course Obivordi, were in a state of comatose. The reason why it didn't work on Ritsuka is because of the fact that he had already beaten the Lost Will, so it was not gonna work on him again. In it, Ritsuka and Oberon get to talking, with Oberon taunting Ritsuka to fight him, which he decided was a great idea, punching him but doing no damage. Oberon mocked him, asking him what chance do you even have? None. To which Ritsuka answered, I do have a chance. And soon, from a brilliant, hopeful light, came Caltria, or in this case, Artoria Avalon. She didn't come as the child of prophecy, but as the nameless king, as Excalibur. She had become a heroic spirit, in this case, a servant. Oberon, trying to end Britain? Fine, whatever, it was a dying world. Deleting it is for the best at this point. But now Oberon was a threat to the planet itself, which is why Artoria Avalon could be summoned. With her charisma of hope, she was able to awaken everyone who had fallen asleep. Before the final battle began, Ritsuka asked them, why? Why do this? Oberon told them that it's because he wanted to wipe it all clean, getting rid of the fairies and humans alike. Everything until now was a lie. This was always the goal. To which Ritsuka asks him about his own star, about Titania. After that, the battle began. Oberon was defeated soon after, falling off into the endless void below where they were standing on. Again, Oberon video, watch it. After that, Artoria Avalon starts to explain just what she is. Caltria, the child of prophecy, only existed in Fae Britain, and soon she would return to the planet's inner sea along with the Shadow of Paradise, basically Avalon. But her answers and actions were inscribed on this new Artoria. She is not King Arthur or his Lost Belt version, but the concept of the sacred sword's wielder. Basically, Caltria was, in a way, cloned, or I guess a better term for it. She was used as a base for Artoria Avalon. They are separate existences, if I had to say. The only reason why she showed up is because Ritsuka really wanted her help, and Caltria wanted to help him, resulting in her summon. And soon after, she disappeared, for the final time, so the planet can use her as a defense mechanism whenever necessary. After some more tension, Chaldea escapes the hole, and finally ends LB6. Now it's just time for the closing ceremony, which is a fancy way of saying final thoughts. Now you might be asking, what were her spring memories? I could be boring and say that they don't exist, but I'm not gonna do that. Yes, you could say that the Glass Sister in 2018 CE says that her spring memories are hypothetical, but I'm gonna say that Caltria's extra profile has a much more satisfying answer. This is talking about Artoria Avalon. Its name? Artoria Avalon. The third ascension is her actual form, while her appearance in the first and second ascensions represents a life someone once lived. There is a simulacrum of springtime memories belonging to that girl who traveled as a child of prophecy, rather than the recorded history of a fairy of paradise. Now let's look at how the seasons are divided. Her winter memories, most painful, end, and right after that, her autumn, less painful ones, begin. Those end, and after that, it's summer, even less painful. And her summer memories end in Cornwall, with her meeting Ritsuka. Her spring memories are meant to be her fun and happy ones, the ones she would cherish most. I would say that her spring memories are what we see in story, everything that happens after Ritsuka and Caltria meet. I think it fits well. Despite all the pain she felt in the journey and all the hardship and misery, she had friends. People that liked her and didn't just tolerate her. People that she could rely on. She could truly feel alive. So yes, you could say that she just doesn't have them, but I would very much rather believe that she did, and they're just the ones we see in story. Which is why in Avalon, she couldn't see her spring memories, because they hadn't ended yet. I guess in the end, it's up to interpretation, which ends basically everything in the video, which came out way longer than expected. I thought that it would be a similar length to the Krishnaria video, but it came out twice as long. Like, this was a 20-page script. Even then, I'm sure there are some stuff I didn't cover, like Morgan. If I did that, this video would have become even longer, so I decided to maybe save that for another time. Maybe a Morgan video in the future. If you have any other ideas, I'm open to them. If there's something you think I got wrong, tell me in the comments. Like, subscribe, and whatever else there is to do, it helps. Either way, this ends the video. Now excuse me as I take a drink from this glass of wine that was suspiciously given to me. Cheers!